I was running late again. My sneakers squeaked against the polished lobby floor, and my hands still smelled faintly of last night's food deliveries. I had one shot at this job, I couldn't screw it up. The building towered over me like it was daring me to enter. I scanned the directory. Janitorial services, I muttered, following the arrow. I pushed open a large glass door, expecting the smell of cleaning supplies, the soft hum of vacuums. Instead, I found myself in a room so vast it could swallow me whole. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, leather chairs that gleamed under the sunlight. And him. He sat behind a massive oak desk, tall and impossibly composed. He didn't look up immediately. Just a sharp glance, one that made my stomach tighten. "You clean here?" His voice was low, calm, dangerous. I'm sorry, I stammered, stepping back. "I'm here for the janitorial interview." His eyes didn't soften. They measured me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "You," he repeated, leaning back. "You don't look like anyone I'd hire for anything." I flushed, embarrassed. My lips trembled. I just need work. Anything." He raised an eyebrow. "Anything." "Anything," I said, and it sounded smaller than I felt. A chuckle erupted behind me. One of the suits by the door whispered something to another. I felt every eye in the room press against me. Judgment, amusement, disbelief. But he didn't laugh. Not even a little. He just watched. "Sit," he said, and his hand gestured to one of the leather chairs opposite him. I froze, then obeyed. My knees pressed together, my heart hammering. "You're bold," he said. "Bold or stupid? I haven't decided yet." I don't mean to be," I whispered. "You just need work," he finished for me, a faint smirk appearing on his lips. "I can respect that." I blinked. You can?" "Yes." He leaned forward. "But let me ask you something first. Why should I hire you over anyone else?" I opened my mouth, closed it, then swallowed. I couldn't say I was smart or well-educated or experienced. I had only survival. I'm fast," I said. "I can do more than most. I don't give up." He tilted his head, studying me. "I see." The silence stretched. I could feel the sweat forming on my palms. "You know what I hate?" he finally said. "Women. I'm allergic to them." I froze. Did he mean it? Or was he joking? I stammered. I don't understand. I don't date them. I don't trust them. He paused, then sighed. "I don't like them. And yes, that includes every woman who walks into this office. Including you." I wanted to apologize. Or laugh. Or run. But something in his eyes, the sharp honesty, the raw edge, kept me rooted in my chair. "You're hired?" he said suddenly. I blinked. "Hired? For something," he said, leaning back. "Not as a cleaner." I swallowed hard. "Not as a cleaner?" "No," he tapped a pen against the desk. "You'll start tomorrow. Be on time. Don't mess up." I opened my mouth to ask what I would do, what I would be, but he had already turned his gaze back to the papers in front of him. That's when I noticed it, a small photograph on the corner of the desk. A child, laughing with a wide, unrestrained smile. Something in me clenched. I won't disappoint you," I said softly. He didn't answer. He never looked at me again. Not until I left the office, feeling the weight of his eyes burning into my back. As I walked through the lobby, everyone staring, whispers curling around me like smoke, I realized I had no idea what I had just agreed to. But one thing was certain, my life was about to change. Drastically. Irrevocably. Outside, the city breathed around me. The wind lifted my hair, and for the first time in weeks, I felt it, possibility. A spark. Yet even as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something far bigger than a job. Something dangerous. Something binding. I passed the revolving doors, my reflection in the glass staring back at me. This wasn't the girl who delivered food anymore. No, she was someone else now. Someone being noticed. Someone chosen. And I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. That night, I lay awake thinking about his words. About the photograph. About the strange, impossible way he had measured me with his eyes. "You'll start tomorrow," I whispered to myself, "and nothing will ever be the same." I didn't know why, but I already felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. Curiosity that would not let me sleep. The next morning, I arrived early. My stomach churned as I passed the revolving doors, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes. Whispers followed me down the hallway. "Who does she think she is? The new hire? She's bold. He actually hired her?" I didn't answer. I had learned quickly, silence carried more power than words. When I reached his office, the door was already open. He sat behind the desk, the same unreadable expression on his face. But today something was different. "You're early," he said without looking up. I wanted to make a good impression," I said softly. He finally lifted his gaze, studying me like he had the day before. "Good. Very good." I swallowed, my throat dry. "Thank you, sir." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Everyone says I hate women." I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. "Yes, I've heard that. And yet," he said, voice sharp, "I tolerate you." I blinked. I don't understand why. I'm nothing special." "Nothing special?" He arched an eyebrow. "You're bold, clumsy, fast, and somehow, not annoying." I bit my lip. "Not annoying?" "Not yet," he said. "That could change." I forced a laugh. "I'll try not to disappoint you." "You already have." I froze. What?" "You walked in here yesterday clueless, desperate, smelling like yesterday's deliveries," he said, his voice low but not cruel. "And yet you stayed. You didn't run, didn't cry, didn't beg. You simply existed." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I didn't mean to." He held up a hand. "Don't explain. I don't want excuses. I want observation, awareness, subtlety." I blinked. "Awareness?" "Yes, you'll need it. You'll see quickly that this place, it tests people." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words got stuck. His eyes had that strange weight, like he could see through every layer of me, past the clothes, the hair, the hands that delivered groceries for a living, into the core of who I was. "You're different," he said suddenly. "I can't place it. I don't like women. I can't describe it. You're not like the others." I swallowed hard. "Not like the others?" He leaned back, tapping his pen against the desk. "The others play games. Fake smiles, fake tears. I notice patterns immediately. You don't. Or maybe you do and you hide it well." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. I want to do my job." "Good," he said. "Then observe. Watch. Learn. You'll see how fragile people are. And how dangerous some of them can be." Before I could respond, his assistant appeared at the door, smirking. "Sir, the meeting in 30 minutes. And she's here." I froze. His assistant's glance sliced me like a knife. I knew that look. It was the kind that measured people, decided where they belonged, then tried to crush them. He ignored her, but I noticed the tension in his jaw. "Leave," he said finally. She lingered, eyes narrowing, then gave a small, forced smile and walked away. "You'll notice a lot of things," he said after the door clicked shut. "How alliances are made, how whispers can topple careers, how loyalty is a rare commodity." I'll be careful," I said softly. "You'll need more than careful," he corrected. "You'll need instinct, patience, and nerve." I nodded, feeling a strange thrill. The fear in me was tangled with curiosity. I couldn't tell if I was walking into safety or a trap. He pushed a small folder across the desk toward me. "Start with this. Learn the basics. Know who holds power and who pretends to. Memorize names, faces, weaknesses. You'll need them." I picked it up, my fingers brushing a photograph inside. It was the same child from his desk yesterday. The same laughing eyes. A small note on the back: "Protect her at all costs." My heart tightened. Who is she?" He didn't answer immediately. He simply stared at me. "Sometimes the people you protect the most are the ones who teach you the most." I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. Something about that photograph. It felt like a warning and a promise all at once. The rest of the day was a blur of whispered instructions, silent observations, and awkward encounters. Every time I passed the assistant, I caught a smirk or a subtle eye roll. Every glance felt like a test. At lunch, I sat alone in the break room. The other employees whispered behind me, their words sharp enough to cut. "She thinks she belongs here," one woman said, shaking her head. "She'll be gone in a week," another replied. I didn't react. I didn't need to. I had learned that silence could be louder than any defense. When I returned to his office in the afternoon, he was reviewing reports. He didn't look up immediately. "You're learning quickly," he said after a long pause. I felt a small surge of pride. I'm trying." "Trying isn't enough here," he corrected. "You need to anticipate. Think ahead. Predict reactions before they happen." I swallowed. I'll do that." He leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Do you know what the real test is?" I shook my head. "Not surviving me," he said. not surviving them. His gaze flicked to the doorway. It's surviving yourself. I didn't understand immediately, but I felt it deep in my chest. A warning, a challenge, a puzzle I had to solve. Tomorrow, he said, standing abruptly, you'll meet someone very important. Watch her closely. Observe. Learn. She is influential. And dangerous. Dangerous? I asked. Yes, he said, voice low. Not in the way you expect. But she will test you. Betray you. And you will need to react correctly. My stomach dropped. Betray me? He smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. Everyone has a price. Everyone has a weakness. Everyone except perhaps you. I shivered, unsure if he was complimenting me or warning me. As I left the office, the child photograph burned in my mind. That small, laughing face, it felt like both an anchor and a key. I couldn't stop thinking about him. The CEO, cold and brilliant. The man who claimed he was allergic to women, yet watched me differently than anyone else. The man who had hired me without explanation. Was he testing me? Or was he curious? The whispers in the hallway followed me again, but I didn't flinch this time. I had begun to understand something crucial. This was a battlefield disguised as a workplace. And I had just taken my first step onto it. I clenched my hands around the folder, the photograph tucked inside. Tomorrow I would see who could be trusted, and who would stab me in the back. And I had a feeling that some of the people I thought were allies weren't. The office felt smaller than ever that morning, suffocating. I tried to keep my head down, to blend into the polished floors and muted chatter. But I could feel it, eyes on me, whispers curling through the air like smoke. Look at her, I heard one coworker murmur as I passed. Does she think she belongs here? I didn't respond. I kept walking, pretending the words didn't sting, though my heart tightened. When I reached my desk, his assistant was already there, perfectly poised, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. Good morning, she said, her tone sweet but layered with something sharp beneath. I see you've survived another day. I forced a polite smile. Morning. She leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. You know, some people here don't take kindly to outsiders. Watch your step. I will, I said softly. My voice felt small in comparison to her effortless dominance. She chuckled. Oh, don't take me wrong. I like you. I just hope you understand how fragile reputations are here. I nodded, though every instinct in me screamed that I was being warned. Later, during a briefing, I noticed her slipping comments into the CEO's reports, subtly undermining me. She would say things like, "Are you sure she can handle this? Perhaps someone with more experience should lead." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my composure. I smiled politely, but inside my chest twisted. Why am I always the target? After the meeting, I lingered near the coffee machine. He appeared, his presence sudden and commanding. You seem tense, he said, eyes narrowing slightly. Just adjusting, I murmured. You're aware of her, aren't you? He asked, nodding subtly toward the assistant, who had just walked away. Yes, I admitted. She seems to watch my every move. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Good. Observation is the first lesson. Learn her patterns, her weaknesses. She will tell you more than you think. I swallowed. Why does she care so much about me? Because you're different, he said. Everyone notices you even if they don't admit it. And people fear what they don't understand. I nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of fear and pride. I didn't yet know if his words were a comfort or a warning. The afternoon dragged, every encounter a subtle test. One colleague accidentally spilled coffee near my desk. Another forgot to forward a crucial email. And all the while, her eyes followed me, always calculating, always evaluating. During a quiet moment, I retreated to the supply closet, pulling out a small notebook I had begun keeping. I wrote down every observation. The assistant's smiles are never genuine. She intercepts emails that involve me. She knows exactly when to appear in the hallway to overhear conversations. Knowledge, I realized, could become power. I was still trembling from the morning when he appeared again, leaning casually against the doorframe. Tracking? He asked, eyes flicking to my notebook. Yes, I said, closing it quickly. I want to understand before acting. Smart, he said. Many people here react before thinking. You observe first. That might save you. I felt a strange warmth at his words, but it was tempered by dread. Save me from what? Later, as the office emptied, she cornered me near the elevators. You're trying hard, she said, tilting her head. I'll give you that. But trying isn't enough. What do you mean? I asked, forcing a steady tone. I mean, she said, voice dropping, you're walking blind into a place filled with sharks. You smile. You nod. You pretend. But every move you make, every trust you give, someone is ready to take it from you. I'll be careful, I said, heart racing. Will you? She challenged, leaning closer. Or will you be crushed quietly while everyone laughs behind your back? I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, to leave forever. But I didn't. I smiled instead, small and polite, though my chest burned. As the elevator doors closed, I leaned against the wall and let out a slow breath. I felt chains around me, fragile, invisible, but unbreakable. At home, I pored over the folder he had given me the day before. Each document, each file, each note was a piece of the puzzle. Patterns emerged, alliances forming in hidden corners, rivalries under polite facades. Everyone was playing a game. And I had just entered the board. That night, I found myself staring at the photograph again, the child on his desk. Laughing eyes. A note that said, protect her at all costs. I didn't know who she was. But I realized something terrifying. This child, or the promise behind her, had become my responsibility. And somehow, that responsibility tethered me to him. To this place. To the invisible chains that bound me. The next morning, I arrived earlier than before. I wasn't nervous this time. I was calculating. He appeared almost immediately, as if he knew. Good, he said. You're early. Observing? Yes, I said. Every detail. Good. That's the first lesson. Watch the people who smile the most. They often hide the sharpest knives. I nodded, mentally cataloging each coworker's gestures, each subtle smirk, each whispered remark. You're aware, he continued, voice dropping, that trust is a currency here. And everyone, even those closest to you, has debts they will collect, sometimes at your expense. I swallowed. I understand. He studied me for a long moment. Do you? I will, I said, though uncertainty lingered. He gave a faint, almost approving nod, then turned to his papers. Later, the assistant appeared again, this time smiling as she handed me a stack of documents. Careful with these, she said softly. One mistake, and it's over. I nodded, taking the papers. Thank you. Her smile lingered, but it didn't reach her eyes. Don't thank me yet, she said. I'm only showing you the surface. I felt a chill. She wasn't just a coworker. She was a test. A predator wearing a polite mask. By mid-afternoon, I found myself alone in the break room. I opened my notebook, reviewing every detail I had observed. Every word, every gesture, every subtle threat catalogued. I realized that knowledge was the only weapon I had. And even that might not be enough. When I returned to his office, he didn't speak immediately. He simply handed me another folder, heavier this time, filled with contracts, emails, and photographs. Tomorrow, he said finally, you will meet someone who has the power to ruin you, or save you. Watch her. Learn her. I opened the folder, glancing at the first photograph. My stomach twisted. It was her, the assistant. Why? I asked, heart pounding. Because everyone has a role to play, he said, eyes sharp. And she will teach you more than anyone else here. Betrayal often comes from the most unexpected places. I felt a wave of fear. I wanted to turn and run, scream, quit. But something inside whispered, endure, learn, survive. As I left the office, the photograph burned in my mind. The assistant, smiling politely but hiding a knife behind her back. The child, a silent promise in his office. The invisible chains tying me to all of it. I clenched my fists, heart racing. Tomorrow would not just test me, it would define me. And I wasn't sure I was ready. I thought I could survive this place. I thought I could smile while the whispers cut me like knives. I thought I could endure the sly smirks, the veiled threats, the calculated undermining. I was wrong. It all hit me at once. The morning had started like any other. The assistant had cornered me near the copier, voice dripping with fake sweetness. You know, not everyone here thinks you belong, she said, tilting her head. I'd be careful if I were you. I know, I murmured, clutching the stack of papers in my hands. My grip tightened so hard the edges crumpled. Oh, don't worry, she said, leaning closer. I'm just looking out for you. Wouldn't want someone like you to make a fool of herself, right? I forced a smile, but inside my chest burned. Her words weren't just warnings, they were threats hidden behind politeness. By lunchtime, the whispers had escalated. A group of employees near the break room watched me, leaning toward each other. She thinks she can survive here? One of them muttered. She'll crack. Everyone cracks, another replied. I turned away, holding back the urge to scream, to throw my lunch across the room, to tell them all to leave me alone. I swallowed hard and walked out, pretending to be calm. Later, I found myself in the janitor's closet, the one small place no one expected me to hide. I locked the door and slid down the wall, hands trembling. The tears came fast, hotter than I expected. Why was I always the target? Why did I let myself believe I could survive? I hugged my knees, rocking slightly, feeling my chest ache with the weight of it all. Stupid, I whispered to myself. Why did I think I could belong here? The folder he had given me, the photographs, the notes, they were supposed to give me an advantage. But knowledge felt useless when every glance from my coworkers reminded me how small I was. My hands shook as I touched the photograph again, the child on his desk, smiling, innocent. That tiny image had become my anchor, but even that couldn't stop the despair twisting inside me. You can't just keep pretending everything's fine, I whispered to the photograph. I can't. Suddenly, a voice behind the door startled me. Everything okay in there? It was the junior security guard, the one who had always been quietly kind, never intrusive. I wiped my tears quickly, standing and attempting a calm smile. Yes, I'm fine. Just resting. He didn't press further. All right. I'll leave you be. The door clicked shut and I sank back to the floor, alone again. My mind spiraled. Every insult, every smirk, every whispered threat replayed endlessly. I hated feeling weak. I hated that my chest felt like it was on fire. I hated that I had trusted, hoped, believed in myself, only to be reminded of my fragility. But amid the pain, a spark flickered. Something inside me refused to break completely. I swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. I will rise, I whispered. Quietly. Without them seeing. Without them enjoying it. I remembered his words from the previous day. Trust is a currency here. Everyone has debts they will collect. I clenched my fist. Then I'll pay my own debts first. By late afternoon, I forced myself to rejoin the office, hiding the ache in my chest behind a polite smile. The assistant approached almost immediately. You look tired, she said, feigning concern. Maybe this place is too much for you? I held her gaze, letting the slightest edge of defiance show. No. I can manage. She arched an eyebrow. Can you? We'll see. Everyone here has their breaking point. I smiled politely, but the fire inside me burned hotter. I won't let you break me. When I finally reached his office, he looked up from his papers. You seem quieter today, he observed. I'm learning, I said, trying to steady my voice. He leaned back, studying me. You're aware that survival isn't about being liked? Yes, I said, my hands trembling slightly under the desk. Good, he said, tapping the folder in front of me. Then you'll understand this assignment. I opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, contracts, and notes. I froze. One of the photographs, it was her, the assistant. She's dangerous, he said softly, as if reading my thoughts. Not in the obvious ways. She hides her claws behind a smile. I'll be careful, I whispered. You'll need more than careful, he said. You'll need observation, patience, nerve, and timing. I nodded. I had learned the lesson painfully today. Later, in the cafeteria, the assistant passed by, giving me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I noticed the subtle glance at my notebook. She had read me, assessed me, and decided I wasn't worth the immediate strike, yet. I realized something terrifying. She didn't need to attack yet. Just existing in her orbit was enough to unravel me. By evening, I returned to the janitor's closet, closing the door behind me. I sank to the floor, clutching the folder to my chest. I imagined leaving, screaming, quitting everything. But then I thought of the child in the photograph, the silent promise in his office. I whispered to myself, I endure. I survive. I rise. I traced my fingers over the folder, memorizing each photograph, each note. Knowledge had to become my weapon. You're stronger than you realize, I whispered. And you're going to need it. A sudden knock startled me. Hey, I'm just checking, said the junior security guard again. You okay? Yes, I said quickly. Just taking a break. He nodded, then left. The door clicked shut. Alone again. I realized something crucial. Nobody here would help me unless it benefited them. Everyone was playing a game, alliances, betrayals, secrets. The assistant's smile, the whispers, the subtle undermining, it was all a test. And I had just learned that the only way to survive was to change. Quietly. Secretly. Power wasn't given. It had to be taken. I glanced at the small photograph one last time before leaving the closet. The child's smile seemed to tell me, endure, learn, and you will rise. The next morning I returned to the office with a new resolve. The whispers, the sneers, the sly smirks, they would no longer break me. I would observe. I would learn. I would adapt. And I would rise silently before anyone realized I had changed. I didn't yet know how, but I promised myself I would. As I entered his office, he looked up from his papers, eyes narrowing slightly. "You survived yesterday," he said. "Yes," I replied, voice steady. "I survived." "Good," he said. "Because the real challenges are just beginning." My stomach twisted. Just beginning? And that's when I realized I wasn't just fighting others. I was fighting myself. For the first time, I understood what he had meant by invisible chains. Chains I couldn't see, but that bound me to this place, to him, and to the person I was becoming. I clenched my fists, gripping the folder tightly. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would take the first real step toward breaking free, or mastering the chains entirely. I walked into the office that morning with a new resolve. My shoulders were straighter. My steps more deliberate. I felt eyes on me, whispers following, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. "You look different today," one coworker murmured as I passed. "I'm fine," I said softly, keeping my eyes forward. Her smirk didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see how long that lasts." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Silence was stronger than any argument. When I reached his office, he was already there, reviewing documents. He didn't look up immediately. I waited, breathing slowly. "You seem calm," he said finally, glancing at me. "Yes," I said, voice steady. "I'm focused." He leaned back, tapping a pen on the desk. "Good. You'll need that. Focus is rare here." "I understand," I said, sliding into the chair opposite him. He studied me as always, like he could see every thought I had. "Tell me," he said, voice low, "what have you learned so far?" I hesitated for only a moment. "I've learned that appearances are deceptive. That people smile while hiding knives. That knowledge is power. And that survival requires more than patience, it requires observation." He raised an eyebrow. "Impressive. And dangerous." I smiled faintly, feeling a surge of confidence. "Yes. But I'm learning." He leaned forward. "Learning isn't enough. You must anticipate. Predict reactions before they happen." "I will," I said, swallowing the flutter in my chest. Throughout the day, I began paying closer attention, not just to him but to everyone around me. I noted his habits, how he moved in meetings, the subtle flicker in his eyes when someone lied, the way he gestured when he was amused versus when he was annoyed. I watched how power bent people, forcing polite smiles and hidden deference. "Why do they all act like that?" I whispered to myself during a break. "Because they fear what they can't control," his voice replied behind me. I jumped slightly, forgetting he sometimes appeared silently. "You should learn that," he said, his eyes sharp. "Power isn't given. It's earned. And sometimes, it's taken quietly." I nodded, words failing me. Something about the way he said it made my pulse quicken, not with fear but understanding. By lunchtime, I found a quiet corner. I opened my notebook and started making lists. Habits, alliances, subtle power plays. Every note felt like armor, every observation a shield. The assistant appeared nearby, holding a stack of reports. "Busy?" she asked, her smile tight, controlled. "Yes," I said calmly. "I'm catching up." "You always seem aware," she said, leaning slightly closer. "Do you think that's enough?" I didn't answer immediately. I simply met her gaze. "Not yet." Her smirk faltered for a split second before returning. She handed me the papers. "Then I guess we'll see." I watched her walk away. I realized something important. She wasn't just a threat, she was a teacher. A cruel, polished teacher showing me how subtle betrayal could be. By the afternoon, I had made small but deliberate changes. My clothes were sharper, my hair neat, my movements precise. No one noticed immediately, but I felt different. Stronger. Ready. When I returned to his office later, he gestured toward the child photograph on his desk. "You've noticed her, haven't you?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted. "Every time I see her, it reminds me why I need to observe, to endure, to learn." He nodded, faint approval in his eyes. "Good. Remember, protection can be as powerful as aggression. And sometimes, it's the quietest gestures that shift everything." I touched the photograph gently, letting the weight of the silent promise settle in my chest. This child, her innocence, her presence, was a reminder. Not of weakness but of responsibility. As the day wound down, the assistant passed by again. She paused, giving me a small nod, almost imperceptible, before continuing. I realized she was testing me, measuring me, deciding if I was worth the effort of betrayal or danger. I clenched my fists under the desk. I won't be weak. I won't be naive. I'll learn. And I'll rise quietly. Back at my desk, I noticed a small, crumpled contract someone had left behind. A legal document tied to one of the company's subsidiaries. I picked it up carefully, scanning the fine print. Every clause, every signature, every obligation became a puzzle. I knew that understanding it would give me leverage. Knowledge was power, and I was quietly gathering it. During the late afternoon briefing, the assistant tried to trip me up again, asking leading questions about reports she knew I hadn't prepared. "Are you sure you checked these numbers?" she asked sweetly. "Yes," I said calmly, though my pulse raced. "I cross-referenced them. Twice." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes flickered. "Impressive. Perhaps you're more competent than I thought." I let her believe that she had acknowledged me. But inside, I knew I had only just begun. After everyone left, he called me into his office again. "You're changing," he observed, voice low. I'm trying," I said. "Trying isn't enough," he said. "You're learning. That is rare. That is valuable. And dangerous, for both of us if misused." I swallowed. "I understand." "Good," he said, gesturing toward the folder. "Tomorrow you will start applying what you've learned. Not everyone here is obvious. Some betray quietly. Some hide under smiles. You'll need to identify them before they strike." "I will," I said, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle in my chest. As I left his office, the assistant lingered nearby, giving me a last scrutinizing glance. I held her gaze briefly, letting her know I had noticed every subtle move. She tilted her head as if impressed, or perhaps surprised. Back at my desk, I opened my notebook. Every observation, every subtle interaction, every note on habits and weaknesses began to form a map in my mind. Alliances, threats, opportunities, they were all pieces of a puzzle I was quietly learning to assemble. By evening, I walked past the child photograph again, touching it lightly. The promise it represented, the silent responsibility I carried, reminded me why I couldn't afford weakness. Not now. Not ever. I realized then that transformation didn't need a grand gesture. It could begin quietly, unnoticed. A sharpened look, a refined smile, a precise word at the right moment. Power was subtle. Influence invisible until wielded. And I was ready to wield it, silently, carefully, without anyone noticing. I clenched the folder in my hands, taking a deep breath. Tomorrow I would step further into this silent game. I would observe, calculate, and act, without revealing a trace of fear. Because I had made a choice. No more tears. No more weakness. No more invisible suffering. I would rise. And they would never see it coming. Weeks passed, and the office that had once felt suffocating began to feel different. Not safer, not friendlier, but sharper, cleaner, like I could finally navigate it without fear. I had changed quietly, almost invisibly. I learned corporate language, the subtle nuances of speech that could convey authority without aggression, confidence without arrogance. I studied patterns, who deferred to whom, who whispered behind doors, who smiled while plotting. One morning as I passed the assistant's desk, she gave me the same polite nod she always did. I smiled faintly back, and for the first time, I noticed hesitation in her eyes. "You're improving," she said, voice careful. I tilted my head, letting the smallest shadow of a smile appear. "I've been observing," I said. "It helps." Her expression flickered, part surprise, part something else I couldn't name, and she returned to her work. I felt a thrill ripple through me. Subtle victories were the sweetest. Later, during a briefing with the CEO, I noticed him watching me more closely than usual. His glances lingered, calculating, as if he were measuring my progress. "You're quiet," he said suddenly. "Yet I can tell you've changed." I've been learning," I said, careful to keep my tone neutral. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Observation alone can't teach you everything. Influence, power, patience, they show themselves only when you act." "I understand," I said, hiding the pulse of excitement that surged inside me. He gave a faint nod. "Good. Many people here think survival is enough. But survival is only the beginning." I swallowed, remembering every harsh glance, every whispered remark from the weeks before. I had survived. Now it was time to prepare. At lunch, I found myself seated near a group of employees who had once whispered about me. "She's still here," one muttered, clearly trying to hide their annoyance. "She looks different," another said. Like she knows something we don't. I smiled faintly, not at them, not fully. I let them underestimate me. Let them think I was still small, still insignificant. You've changed, a colleague said quietly, leaning closer. Do you even work here, or is this some game? I leaned back, voice soft but controlled. It's always been a game, I said. I just learned the rules faster. Their expressions shifted slightly, a mixture of irritation and wariness. That was exactly the reaction I had hoped for. Quiet transformation was the most dangerous kind. Later, as I returned to his office, he gestured toward the child photograph on his desk. You notice her often, he said. I do, I admitted. She reminds me why observing matters, why patience matters, why subtlety matters. He nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Good. That awareness will serve you well. But remember, protection and influence are two sides of the same coin. One is quiet, the other, visible when the moment comes. I traced the photograph lightly, letting the weight of responsibility settle in my chest. I realized I had grown stronger, silently, invisibly, like a shadow expanding in the dark. The assistant appeared again later that day, her expression more neutral than before. You're changing, she said carefully. I can see it. I just didn't expect it so soon. I tilted my head, keeping my voice even. I've been learning. Her gaze flickered as if she were recalculating. Perhaps, you're more dangerous than I thought. I allowed a faint smirk, letting her realize I had noticed her assessment. She looked away quickly, and for the first time I felt a small surge of power. Not over her but over myself. My fear was gone. My anxiety had shifted into focus. By evening I was alone in the office, reviewing documents, memorizing names, noting alliances and subtle betrayals. Each observation was a piece of armor, each note a shield. The world around me had shifted, I could feel it but no one else could. He appeared silently behind me, leaning casually against the doorframe. You're becoming someone else, he said, voice low. Someone who can survive, and eventually someone who can change the rules. I'm trying, I said softly. Trying isn't enough, he corrected. You've survived. You've learned. Now, you prepare. Watch closely tomorrow. Not everyone will show their hand immediately. I nodded, pulse quickening. I understand. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes lingering like he could see every layer I had built. Then he turned back to his papers, leaving me alone with the child photograph. I traced the edge of the desk, thinking of the weeks behind me. Every insult, every sneer, every hidden jab had taught me something. I had absorbed it, transformed it into strength, and quietly become someone no one could dismiss. Later that evening, the assistant returned briefly to hand me a folder. She lingered longer than necessary. Be careful, she said softly, almost like a warning. Not everyone here plays fair. Some smiles hide knives sharper than any blade. I'm aware, I said calmly, meeting her gaze. But I've learned to see beyond them. Her eyes flickered and she nodded subtly before leaving. I sat back, letting the quiet power settle inside me. Weeks of observation, patience, and silent learning had begun to coalesce. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing. Preparing for a moment when I could step forward, when the world would finally notice me, not as the outsider, not as the delivery girl who wandered into the wrong office, but as someone who had endured, adapted, and transformed. The next morning I arrived early, notebook in hand. I had noted patterns in meetings, in interactions, in the subtle hierarchies that governed the office. Everyone was predictable once you knew what to watch. He appeared almost immediately. You're early. Yes, I said calmly. Observing. Good, he said, eyes narrowing slightly. Observation is the first step. But remember, power shows itself in action, not patience alone. I understand, I said, feeling the thrill of anticipation. During the day, I noticed subtle changes in how people responded to me. Whispers halted when I approached. Smiles faltered. Eyes lingered longer than before. The transformation I had nurtured quietly was beginning to manifest externally. Even he noticed. Small gestures, a raised eyebrow, a slight smile, a nod, indicated that he was measuring me, testing me as he always had. But now I felt the scales shifting. Not openly, not yet. But inside, I knew I had begun tipping the balance. By evening, I returned to my desk, opening the folder containing contracts and photographs. The child photo, the subtle glances from the assistant, the patterns of office power, they were all pieces of a puzzle I had begun assembling. I traced the edges of the photograph lightly, thinking of the silent promise it represented. I realized something then. Transformation was quiet, invisible but undeniable. Power was subtle, influence unseen until wielded. And I was ready. The assistant appeared one last time, stopping just outside my office. "You've changed," she said softly, almost admiringly. "But don't forget, change can make enemies as easily as friends." "I've learned that," I said, voice steady. "And I'm ready." She nodded slowly and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the quiet thrill of unseen strength. As I packed up to leave that evening, I caught his glance across the office. He wasn't smiling, but I could feel his attention. Something unspoken passed between us, a recognition of the shift, subtle but undeniable. I walked past the photograph one last time, touching it lightly. The promise it represented, the responsibility it carried, and the quiet strength I had cultivated, they were all mine now. Tomorrow I thought I would begin the next stage. Not survival, not observation, but action. Quiet action. Strategic, deliberate, invisible until it struck. I had changed. Hidden, subtle, undeniable. And soon the world around me would notice. The office felt different that morning. Not louder, not brighter, but heavier. The air seemed to hum with tension I hadn't noticed before. I watched silently as I always did, sipping my coffee, notebook open, ready to record patterns, behaviors, and mistakes. It started small. The assistant who had once cornered me at the copier, voice sweet but deadly, made a slip. "Wait, these numbers," she muttered during a meeting, frowning at her own spreadsheet. "No, that can't be right." I watched her colleagues glance at her papers. Whispers began, soft but sharp. She missed a key deadline? Unbelievable. I didn't intervene. I let it unfold. The office had eyes everywhere, and the gossip spread faster than any report. She flushed, realizing her mistake. I could almost feel her power slipping, the subtle control she had wielded over me unraveling quietly. Later, I noticed that a contract I had reviewed, one she had tried to manipulate, had already caused issues for her. A senior manager, one I had quietly alerted to inconsistencies, confronted her politely but firmly. "I'm surprised this went unnoticed," he said. "Are you sure all these figures were double-checked?" Her mouth opened, then closed. A forced nod. She stammered. I thought they were." The quiet ripples of karma were beginning. And I only observed. No smirks, no satisfaction, only careful documentation in my notebook. At lunch, whispers followed her. People avoided her now, not aggressively but subtly, as if sensing she had lost the invisible influence she once held. I leaned back, watching from a distance. Power shifts quietly. No one notices until it hits them fully. I felt a thrill in my chest, not from revenge but from understanding. The rules were simple. Observe, wait, and let consequences unfold naturally. Later, he appeared in the hallway, briefcase in hand. He slowed near me, gaze flicking toward my notebook. "You're observing again," he said quietly, almost as if confirming something he already suspected. "Yes," I said calmly. "Patterns, mistakes, reactions." He nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. "And what have you learned?" "That quiet influence can be more powerful than overt control," I said, voice measured. "People who underestimate others, they often pay for it." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "Indeed. Karma doesn't need a loud voice. It whispers, subtle, unseen, until the shift is complete. You understand that better than most." I looked down, flipping through my notebook. Every error she made, every whispered word of gossip, every misstep I had quietly noted, it was all forming a pattern I could predict. "I see it," I said softly. "The consequences, even small ones, can be devastating if left unchecked." He studied me, expression unreadable. "And you've learned patience. That's rare. Most people rush to act, to shout, to make their presence known. But quiet observation, that builds power." By mid-afternoon, I noticed the assistant avoiding my gaze. She no longer tried to corner me. She no longer smiled with that false sweetness. Instead, she walked past, head lowered, careful, calculating every step. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The shift was visible, subtle, undeniable. Karma had begun its work quietly and effectively. When I returned to the office later, I noticed a colleague approaching me nervously. "Hey, I just wanted to say," they trailed off, glancing around. "You've been noticing things, right? Things others don't see?" I nodded slightly. "I've learned to pay attention." They hesitated, then whispered, "It's impressive. You've changed." I allowed a small smile, polite but measured. "I'm still learning." It was true. Even as subtle victories unfolded around me, I knew my transformation was far from complete. I had learned to navigate the office, but the real test was how my actions, or inactions, would shift the balance of power around me. Back at his office, he gestured toward the child photograph. "You notice subtle shifts," he said quietly. "Even the smallest ripple can become a wave if you wait. That's what you're learning." "Yes," I admitted. "I see the patterns. I see the mistakes, and the consequences." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "And how does that feel?" I paused, considering. "Powerful, but quiet. Not in a way that others notice yet. But enough to know I can influence outcomes, without being seen." "Good," he said. "That's the point. The world notices only when the wave hits the shore. Until then, patience is your ally." Later, as I walked past the assistant, our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw recognition there, subtle but unmistakable. She understood that the quiet observation had begun to shift the balance. She realized I had changed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The tension between us was enough. At my desk, I opened the folder he had given me weeks ago. Contracts, reports, photographs, notes, they had become tools, symbols of influence and responsibility. Each item represented a piece of the puzzle I had been silently assembling. I glanced at the child photograph again. The innocence in her eyes reminded me why patience mattered. Not for revenge, but for understanding. For timing. For knowing when to act, and when to wait. By evening, I overheard whispers of her frustration, the assistant trying to maintain composure while subtly losing authority. "She's too precise now," someone muttered. "Every move, calculated." "She's changed," another whispered. "And everyone's noticing." I leaned back in my chair, sipping coffee quietly. I didn't feel pride. Only confirmation. Patience, observation, and careful timing were more effective than confrontation or visible retaliation. Karma had begun. Quietly. Efficiently. Devastatingly. As I packed my notebook and folder to leave, he appeared by my desk. "You've been watching," he said, voice calm but firm. "And the world around you is responding." "Yes," I said softly. "Karma seems to be working quietly. Without force. Without noise. Just natural consequences." He nodded, eyes darkening slightly. "And you notice the subtle shifts in me as well, don't you?" I hesitated, heart racing. "Yes, I see it. Your attention, it lingers. Your questions, not out of duty but curiosity." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Good. That awareness, that's dangerous for both of us. But necessary. The game has begun and both of us are players." I swallowed, realizing he was acknowledging the shift, just as quietly as I had been building it. Something in him had changed, though I couldn't yet define it. Hesitation. Interest. Caution. All of it. As I left the office, I glanced at the assistant one last time. She passed by, head down, face composed, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the careful calculation in her steps. She had begun to understand the ripple of quiet power I had set into motion. Outside, the city was alive with movement, oblivious to the quiet battles unfolding within the glass walls of that corporate tower. I carried the weight of the child photograph, the folder of notes, the silent lessons learned. I felt the shift, the subtle, almost invisible momentum of karma and change. And I understood finally that power didn't need to be loud. Influence didn't need to be flashy. Sometimes, the quietest actions, the smallest observations, could topple mountains without anyone seeing the first crack. I clenched the folder tightly in my hands. Tomorrow the consequences would continue. Small mistakes would become lessons, whispers would become warnings, and the office would never quite be the same. Karma had begun. Quietly. Invisible. And devastating. I glanced once more at the child photograph, feeling the weight of silent responsibility settle in my chest. Patience, observation, subtle influence, these were my weapons now. And the game was only beginning. As I left the building, I realized, the next move wouldn't be mine alone. The world around me was already responding, subtly, inexorably, to the quiet transformation I had nurtured. The shift had started. And soon everyone would notice. The office felt different that week. Not because the whispers had stopped, they hadn't, but because I realized I wasn't completely alone. I had underestimated the quiet alliances forming around me. It started with the junior manager who had once given me a curt glance in the hallway. "Hey," he said softly as I passed near the filing cabinets. "I noticed your notes. They're thorough. Impressive." I paused, surprised. "Thanks." I've been trying to understand the patterns. He nodded, voice low. Most people here don't see half of what you notice. Keep doing it, quietly. I smiled faintly. Quiet encouragement, nothing more, but it mattered. It meant I wasn't invisible. It meant someone saw me, not in passing, not as an annoyance, but as someone capable. Later, the security guard who had once checked on me in the janitor's closet appeared by the elevator. You've been handling yourself well, he said, arms crossed, eyes careful. Not everyone gets it. Not everyone survives this place. I appreciate that, I said. It means a lot coming from you. He nodded and gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile before walking away. Subtle support, silent, unspoken, but it carried weight. I began realizing that trust could be built quietly, with small gestures, without words or fanfare. Even one of the CEO's former rivals, an executive no one spoke to openly, began offering small signs of alliance. A shared look in a meeting. A subtle nod when I made a point. Nothing overt, but noticeable if you were paying attention. I leaned back in my chair, notebook open, tracing the patterns of loyalty, subtle favors, and quiet support. I was no longer completely isolated. I had allies, small and cautious but real. The assistant, still tense, watched me from across the room. I felt her awareness, the way she measured my interactions with others. Her influence was waning, subtly, under the invisible weight of the alliances I had nurtured quietly. That evening he appeared at my desk unexpectedly. You've built connections, he observed, voice calm, but with that underlying edge of calculation he always carried. Yes, I admitted softly. I realized I don't have to be entirely alone to succeed. I can observe, learn, and build quietly. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. Careful, he said. Trust is dangerous. But sometimes necessary. I hesitated. I trust them in small ways. Carefully. Not recklessly. Good, he said. That's how it begins. But trust in this place, it must be measured. And consequences, they are never far behind. I nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle in my chest. Trust wasn't weakness. It was power, over situations, over decisions, over choices I had yet to make. And with that understanding came a new sense of strength. The assistant appeared nearby, placing a folder on my desk. Careful, she said softly. Her tone was almost warning, almost acknowledgement. You're weaving connections. Be mindful. Not everyone here appreciates it. I understand, I replied evenly. I'm aware of the risks. And I'm careful. She hesitated, then left. Her eyes lingered, a subtle acknowledgement that she knew I had begun to shift the dynamics quietly. The next day, during a meeting, I noticed my small network of allies acting in ways I hadn't explicitly instructed but had influenced silently. The junior manager offered a clarifying point that strengthened my argument without drawing attention. The security guard subtly ensured I had access to documents I needed. Even the former rival subtly validated my insights during a strategic discussion. I realized then that influence didn't need to be direct. Sometimes, quiet, invisible nudges created outcomes more powerful than overt control. Later he called me into his office. His expression was unreadable as always. You've changed, he said. Not just in observation or patience but in influence. People are responding to you. Subtly, yes, but noticeably. That's a skill few possess. I didn't act overtly, I said. Just built quiet trust. He studied me. Exactly. Quiet influence. It's more effective than confrontation. And it's harder to counter. I glanced at the child photograph on his desk, the symbol of responsibility and silent promise. I traced its edge lightly. It reminded me why trust mattered. Not for control, not for power over others, but for influence over the outcomes I needed. Sometimes, he said softly, almost as if thinking aloud, the strongest bonds are the ones forged quietly. Alliances without declarations. Trust without fanfare. Observed, measured, and rewarded when the time is right. I nodded. I've begun to understand that. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Good. The quietest player often has the sharpest advantage. Never forget that. Back at my desk, the assistant passed by, watching me carefully. I met her gaze for a brief moment, letting her see that I noticed her scrutiny. She paused, then moved on. I could feel the subtle tension between us. Her awareness that I had shifted the office balance quietly, and her calculation of how to respond. I spent the evening reviewing my notebook, tracing connections, subtle influences, and small acts of trust. Each interaction, each observation, Each minor alliance was a thread weaving a network of influence I could rely on. And yet, I couldn't ignore him. The CEO remained an enigma. Sometimes distant, sometimes protective in ways I didn't understand. I could feel his eyes measuring me, testing me, but also respecting the boundaries I had quietly established. That night I found myself staring at the child photograph once more. It had become more than a symbol of responsibility, it was a reminder that even in a world built on betrayal, careful trust could create strength. Small, deliberate, invisible but unbreakable. The next morning as I arrived early, I noticed the junior manager waiting near the elevators. "You're early," he said softly. "I thought I'd catch you before the chaos begins." "I like to observe first," I said calmly, smiling faintly. "It helps me understand the patterns." He nodded. "I see. And you're doing it well. People notice even if they don't admit it." I felt a small thrill. It wasn't recognition I sought, it was confirmation that subtle influence could shape outcomes without a single dramatic move. By midday, subtle shifts were already evident. The assistant hesitated when she approached me, choosing words carefully, testing boundaries she had once crossed without thought. My allies moved around me quietly, supporting decisions, confirming insights, and validating observations without drawing attention. During a brief corridor encounter, he appeared unexpectedly. "You've built connections," he said softly, voice low but deliberate. "Not just observation now but influence. Quiet influence." "Yes," I said. "I've learned that trust, careful, measured trust, creates subtle power. People respond differently when they feel heard, supported, or acknowledged. Even quietly, even without words." He studied me for a long moment. "Indeed. That is dangerous, for both you and me." I hesitated. "Dangerous how?" He gave a faint, knowing smile. "Because you've begun to understand the rules. And the game has only just begun." Later, I caught the assistant glancing at me from across the room. She was calculating, observing, weighing options. I met her gaze briefly, and I could feel the invisible tension, a silent acknowledgement that the balance of power had begun to shift. I returned to my desk and opened my notebook again, scanning the notes, the minor alliances, and the quiet influence I had nurtured. Everything was subtle. Everything was deliberate. But the ripples had begun. I traced the edge of the child photograph again, feeling the weight of the silent promise. Trust had become power. Observation had become influence. And the office, the people, the dynamics, were no longer predictable. I realized that influence wasn't about domination. It wasn't about being feared or envied. It was about shaping outcomes, guiding choices, and understanding the flow of events before anyone else noticed. Quiet, deliberate, untraceable. And I had begun to master it. As I packed up my notes and the folder of documents, I glanced at the CEO across the office. His gaze lingered on me longer than usual. There was curiosity there. Hesitation. Perhaps recognition. I understood then that the next stage wouldn't be about survival or quiet observation alone. It would be about subtle confrontation. About using the bonds, the influence, and the quiet power I had cultivated. The game was changing. And I was ready. Tomorrow, I told myself, would be the day I tested the strength of these unexpected bonds, and measured the first ripples of real influence. I left the office with a calm certainty, knowing the silent alliances I had built would become my foundation. And somewhere I felt a dangerous thrill. Trust could be a weapon. And I had learned how to wield it. The invitation arrived quietly, slipped under my office door along with the latest financial reports. A gala, celebrating the company's latest success. I stared at it for a long moment. Once I would have hesitated. Once I would have felt out of place, too small for the glittering crowd of executives and investors. But now, something had shifted inside me. I felt ready. Not for applause, not for attention, but for visibility on my own terms. I spent the week preparing quietly, making careful choices. A dress that spoke of subtle elegance, shoes that whispered confidence, hair styled without extravagance but polished enough to command attention. Every choice deliberate. Every detail designed to project the version of myself I had been building quietly for months. The night arrived. The lobby of the gala shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble. Guests in designer suits and glittering gowns moved past, murmuring congratulations, discussing mergers, investments, and influence. I stepped forward, taking a deep breath. This was not just an event. This was the first public stage where my transformation could be seen, not whispered about in hallways but undeniable. I spotted him almost immediately. Across the room, the CEO stood like a statue of calm authority, eyes scanning the crowd. I felt his gaze find me and I held it without flinching. His expression was unreadable, but I noticed the subtle lift of his brow, the flicker of curiosity, maybe even admiration. I moved into the crowd, exchanging polite nods, small smiles, quiet recognition. A senior investor approached, clearly taken by my poise. "You handled the quarterly presentation brilliantly," he said, voice low enough to remain private. I wasn't expecting such precision from someone new. "I appreciate that," I said evenly, hiding the thrill that ran through me. "I've been studying the numbers closely." He nodded. "Clearly. And it shows. Keep it up." The whispers began almost immediately. Not cruel, not envious, but a soft recognition. "She's changed." People leaned closer, watching my interactions, noting my confidence, the way I commanded presence without demanding it. Later, I found myself cornered by the assistant, the same one who had subtly tried to undermine me for months. She smiled, sharp, polite, but with tension beneath. "You look different tonight," she said, voice careful. Confident. Almost untouchable. I tilted my head, voice soft, measured. "I've learned a few things. Patience. Observation. Influence." Her smile faltered. I see that." "I'm glad," I said evenly, turning away. Every word, every gesture was deliberate. She was noticing the shift, and it made her uneasy. Across the room I caught the CEO watching again. He didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt the weight of his attention. It lingered, subtle but undeniable. I realized, perhaps for the first time, that the lines between employer and employee had begun to blur. Not officially, not openly, but in the silent language of recognition, respect, and maybe something more. A junior manager, one of my quiet allies, approached. "You're remarkable," he said softly. "No one expected this." I smiled faintly, not fully. "It's been a long time coming." He nodded. "It's noticeable. People are responding." "Yes," I admitted. And that response, it can be quiet but powerful. As the night progressed, I mingled carefully. Every conversation was a test, a study, a moment to observe the ripple of influence I had nurtured. Even subtle compliments, the way people deferred to my insights and the recognition in their eyes, it all confirmed the quiet power shift. Later, he approached me directly, standing just close enough for others to notice our interaction but not interrupting the flow of the gala. "You've changed," he said quietly, voice low but deliberate. "Not just appearance, but presence, authority, even influence. People respond to you differently." I've been learning," I said softly, feeling my pulse quicken. "Learning to observe, to understand, and to act with intention." He studied me, eyes narrowing, assessing, calculating. "Do you know what you've done?" "Yes," I said. "I've learned that quiet influence can be stronger than overt control. That respect can be earned without shouting. That patience can be more powerful than confrontation." A faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at his lips. "And it shows. Even in this crowd, even under scrutiny, you've shifted the balance." I glanced around, seeing subtle glances from coworkers, whispers caught mid-lip. People were noticing. The assistant's gaze flickered nervously toward me. My allies gave small, approving nods, discreetly visible to me alone. "You've taken the first step," he said quietly. "But influence is a double-edged sword. The moment it becomes visible, reactions are unpredictable." I nodded, understanding fully. This was more than survival. This was subtle, intoxicating power I had built silently, carefully, and deliberately. At one point, the assistant tried to interrupt a conversation I was having with a potential investor. She smiled sweetly, but I caught her small hesitation. I responded with calm authority. "I appreciate your input," I said softly, meeting her gaze steadily, "but I'll handle this one." Her lips pressed thin, a brief flash of irritation or recognition, perhaps both. She stepped back. I felt a quiet rush of satisfaction, not for domination but for acknowledgement. The subtle power I had cultivated was now visible, undeniable. Across the room he observed. I felt the intensity of his gaze, and for the first time I sensed admiration, not just curiosity. Respect, yes, but something more complex, more dangerous. Interest? Hesitation? Possibly a warning. Later, near the balcony, I found a quiet moment alone. The city lights shimmered below, distant and indifferent to the small dramas unfolding inside the gala. I traced the edge of the child photograph I carried in my clutch, the reminder of responsibility, of careful observation, of silent transformation. I realized then that this was only the beginning. The first public signs of change were visible, but the real test would come when my quiet influence met open confrontation. When whispers became words. When subtle respect became undeniable challenge. A senior investor approached, leaning in. "Your presentation earlier," he said quietly, "was flawless. Concise, measured, persuasive. I wasn't expecting that level of poise." "Thank you," I said softly, feeling the thrill of recognition settle like fire in my chest. "I've learned from observation and careful preparation." He nodded. "It shows. You're someone to watch." I smiled faintly, letting the words sink in. Someone to watch. The phrase echoed in my mind, not pridefully, but as confirmation that I had begun to tip the balance. The assistant passed nearby again, glancing at me. This time, her tension was palpable. I met her gaze for a heartbeat and she looked away. No words were exchanged, but the acknowledgement of my growing presence hung in the air between us. Finally, he approached once more, this time close enough for only us to hear. "You've made yourself visible," he said softly, voice low, deliberate. "And with visibility comes attention, scrutiny, and expectation. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes," I said quietly, heartbeat quickening. "It means the game has changed. That influence must be wielded carefully, deliberately. That power, even subtle, is now undeniable." He nodded slowly. "And you feel it?" "I do," I admitted. "And it's intoxicating." He gave a faint smile, almost approving, almost cautious. "Good. But remember, power can shift as quickly as it appears. The moment you become visible, the rules change. Watch carefully. Act wisely." I nodded. The weight of his words settled over me. Subtle influence had become visible, quiet power now recognized. The office, the people, even he himself, everything had shifted. And I was at the center of it. As the gala wound down, I found myself alone briefly on the balcony, looking at the city below. The lights seemed smaller, more manageable. The subtle currents of power, respect, envy, and curiosity swirled around me, nearly tangible. I realized I was no longer the quiet observer, the unnoticed delivery girl who had wandered into the wrong office. I was someone entirely new. Someone visible. Someone whose influence could no longer be ignored. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. "You've changed," he said quietly behind me. "Not just in skill, not just in presence, but in how the world responds to you." "Yes," I said, voice low. "And I feel it. The shift, it's intoxicating. But I know the danger too." He nodded, silent for a long moment. "Good. Never forget, visibility brings consequences. But it also brings opportunity." I glanced at him, meeting his gaze fully. "I understand. And I'm ready." He studied me, expression unreadable. "Tomorrow the game begins in earnest. Tonight, you've only revealed the first layer." I took a deep breath, clutching the child photograph once more. The balance had shifted. Power was no longer silent. Influence was now visible. And I knew in my bones that nothing, and no one, would see me the same way again. As I left the gala, heels clicking on the polished marble floor, I felt the invisible currents of the office, the subtle attention of allies and rivals alike, and the unwavering gaze of the CEO follow me. The shift had begun. Public. Irreversible. And I was ready for whatever came next. It was late. The office was quiet, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound. I was gathering my notes, closing my notebook when I felt him behind me. "You're still here?" he asked softly, voice low, carrying an unfamiliar weight. "Yes," I replied, turning slightly. Some reports needed finishing. He stepped closer, closing the door behind him. The room felt smaller somehow, the polished wood walls echoing the tension between us. "I need to speak with you," he said, his usual calm authority edged with something else, something fragile. I froze, unsure what to expect. Anger? Criticism? Perhaps even dismissal. But the vulnerability in his voice made me pause. "About what?" I asked softly, careful not to betray curiosity. "About everything," he said, voice trembling slightly. "About my mistakes. My regrets. My inability to connect." I blinked. His words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. I don't understand," I said, stepping closer. "What are you saying?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing slightly. "I've been cold, distant, harsh. I've hurt people, especially you. And I see it now. I see how my walls, my fear of intimacy, have caused damage." I didn't speak. I listened, heart racing, feeling the weight of his confession. "I've always kept people at a distance," he continued. Women especially. I've been allergic to them emotionally. I told myself it was protection, but it was fear. Fear of letting anyone close. Fear of being vulnerable. I felt my chest tighten. This was not the man everyone whispered about in the office. This was human, fragile, deeply flawed. And you, he said, voice almost breaking, you came in, and you changed something. Something in me I didn't expect. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to feel. I swallowed, emotions a storm behind my eyes. Part of me wanted to recoil, to keep the distance I had fought so hard to maintain. Another part wanted to reach out, to understand, to witness the raw truth behind the mask. You have surprised me, he continued. Not because of who you are alone, but because you're real, grounded, honest. You've seen through my walls, and yet, you didn't run. I didn't know how to respond. I took a step closer, keeping my voice calm. And now? I asked. What are you saying to me? I'm saying, he whispered, I regret everything I did to make you doubt yourself, to make you feel small, to make you feel powerless. I see now that you've grown stronger, quietly, invisibly. And I am fascinated. I can't explain it. I felt the room tilt slightly, my pulse quickening. Fascination, respect, recognition, and underneath it all, vulnerability. You're human, I said softly, my voice steady. Flawed, capable of regret like everyone else. I see that now. He nodded slowly, relief and tension mixed in his expression. Yes, and you have a choice. How you respond. How you wield this knowledge. I met his gaze fully, measuring the weight of my own power. I had been invisible, unnoticed, underestimated. Now I held the silent authority. My silence, my calm, my observation. It was more powerful than words. I understand, I said finally. I can forgive. I can choose how this affects me. Or I can let the past dictate my actions. Either way, I decide the next move. He let out a long breath, leaning back slightly as if the confession itself had drained him. I've never spoken like this before. Not to anyone. I can see that, I said softly. And yet here we are. His eyes fell to the child photograph on his desk, the same one I had traced countless times, a symbol of silent responsibility, careful observation, and growth. He touched it lightly. I didn't expect someone like you to come into my life. And now, I can't unsee it. The walls I built, they're gone quietly because of you. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply let him see the impact of his words on me. My silence was deliberate, controlled, and more powerful than any reply. He faltered, taking a step closer. I didn't know how to handle someone who sees everything, and yet doesn't judge. Someone who survived me silently without complaint. I raised my hand slightly, not in defense but as a boundary. I'm no longer the frightened girl you might have known. I've learned patience, observation, influence. And I choose how to use it. He nodded, almost reluctantly. I see that. And it terrifies me in a way I didn't expect. Why? I asked, curiosity tempered with caution. Because, he admitted quietly, you are real. You're capable of influence, power, and judgment that I can't control. And yet, you've been patient, silent, observant. I respect that. And more than that. He stopped, caught on the edge of words he couldn't form. I watched him, fascinated in turn. This was not arrogance, not ego. This was raw human vulnerability, exposed and unshielded. You, I said softly, voice steady. You are human, deeply flawed, capable of regret. And I have a choice. Yes, he whispered. You have all the power in this moment. And I can only wait, hope, and... I stepped closer, closer than I had ever allowed myself before. My hand hovered over the child photograph again, a symbol of quiet power, of responsibility, of choices that mattered more than words. I won't let the past dictate me, I said finally. But I also won't ignore the truth. You have shown me yours. And now I see the path forward. Quietly, carefully, deliberately. He nodded, swallowing hard. And I must accept it, that the woman before me is no longer the same. That the girl who walked into my office has become someone I can't dismiss. Someone I respect. Someone He faltered again, words failing him. His gaze held mine, raw and unshielded. I realized then that confession had stripped him bare, just as patience and observation had transformed me. You see, I said softly, voice steady, silence can be louder than words. Observation can outweigh confrontation. Patience can be more powerful than anger. I've learned that. Yes, he whispered. And I've learned too. Too late to hide behind walls. Too late to pretend I am immune. You've revealed more than I expected. The room was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. The child photograph, the folder of documents, my notebook, all symbols of the silent transformations that had brought us to this moment, lay between us like markers of power, responsibility, and choice. I could choose to forgive. I could use this revelation. I could walk away letting past pain continue to sting. Or I could wait, observe, and decide my next step deliberately, quietly, powerfully. I chose silence. And in that silence, I realized I held more influence than I ever had with words. My calm, measured, deliberate presence was a statement in itself. He swallowed hard, leaning back against the desk. I didn't expect this, he admitted softly. That you would handle it like this. That you would remain in control. I've learned, I said quietly. Control is not taken. It is understood, observed, and wielded carefully. He nodded slowly, almost reverently. I see that. And I am grateful. And sorry? I didn't respond immediately. My eyes stayed on him, weighing, measuring, deciding. Silence stretched between us, tense, heavy, filled with unspoken truths. Finally I spoke, voice calm, deliberate. The past is yours to reckon with. The future is mine to shape. He looked at me, expression unreadable. Then he nodded, slowly, reluctantly, respectfully. I understand, he whispered. And I will wait. For whatever comes next. I stepped back, feeling the weight of the room settle around me. My hand brushed the edge of the child photograph one last time, a silent symbol of responsibility, patience, and deliberate power. I turned toward the door, glancing over my shoulder. He watched me, silent, still raw, still human. I realized then that confession had changed him, just as quiet transformation had changed me. And in that change, we both stood exposed, aware, and measured. The door closed behind me softly. My notebook, my folder, the child photograph, symbols of my careful, deliberate journey, remained in the room, but the power now rested firmly within me. And for the first time I understood fully, silence, observation, and careful patience could hold more power than words. More than anger. More than fear. I had a choice. And I had the power to shape the next move. I sat in my office, staring at the child photograph again. Its edges were worn from months of tracing, from countless moments of reflection. Tonight it felt heavier than ever. It reminded me of every betrayal, every tear, every lesson I had endured to reach this point. I had a choice. Always had a choice. But now the stakes were different. I could let him back into my life. Risk heartbreak. Risk disappointment. Risk everything I had built quietly and carefully. Or I could walk away. Keep the strength I had forged in fire, maintain the control I had fought to claim. I heard the soft click of the door behind me before I even looked up. He entered, silent as ever, but I could feel the tension in his steps. You asked to see me, I said without looking up, calm, deliberate. He paused by my desk, hands in his pockets, eyes searching mine. I wanted to know where we stand, he admitted softly. After everything. After the confession. After tonight. I closed the notebook I had been reviewing and finally looked at him. His expression was raw, vulnerable, and unmistakably sincere. For a moment, I remembered the frightened girl who had walked into the wrong office months ago. The girl who had been laughed at, dismissed, and undermined. That girl was gone. Where we stand, I echoed, voice measured, depends entirely on what you can accept, and what I choose to give. He swallowed hard, leaning against the edge of my desk. I see now. I see what I've done, and I see what I've lost. I studied him carefully, letting the weight of the months, the betrayals, the manipulation, the silent transformation, settle between us. Regret is yours, I said softly. But my choice, that is mine. He looked down, voice low. I don't deserve it. Perhaps not, I said. But you cannot decide for me. I decide. And tonight I will. I rose slowly, letting my presence fill the room. The silence stretched, taut and electric. I reached for the child photograph on my desk, turning it gently in my hands. I've seen strength grow quietly. I've learned to observe, to wait, to influence without words. And I've measured every risk. He stepped closer, cautiously, as if sensing the power in my control. I understand. And I respect your decisions. I held his gaze. Respect is earned, not given. And trust is fragile. You've shown me both sides. Your walls, your regrets, and the fascination you didn't know how to handle. His eyes softened, a flicker of pain evident. I failed you before. And yet, I hoped. I shook my head gently. Hope is a dangerous thing. It's not mine to give lightly. I've learned to measure consequences. I've learned to protect myself silently. And I've learned to choose freedom over dependence. He stepped even closer, voice low, trembling. Freedom, you mean, for you, not me? Yes, I said firmly. For me. For the woman I've become. And that choice is mine alone. He looked at me, searching my eyes as if seeking the answer in the silence. And, does that include me? I let a faint smile touch my lips. It includes the possibility of someone who has learned from their mistakes. But it does not require submission. It does not require compromise of the person I've fought to become. It requires honesty from both of us. He swallowed hard, stepping back slightly. I can offer that. Honesty. I am willing to wait. To earn whatever you decide. I studied him carefully. This was no longer the arrogant CEO who had rejected, judged, and intimidated. This was a human being, flawed, sincere, and capable of change. But sincerity alone was not enough. Trust had to be rebuilt. And power had to remain balanced. I reached for the contract folder I had kept on my desk, the symbolic document of responsibility, of measured influence, of quiet transformation. I placed it between us. These, I said softly, represent more than obligations. They represent choice, awareness, and consequences. My choice is not about revenge nor submission. It is about freedom and power. The power to shape my life, to guide my interactions, and to decide what I allow into it. He nodded slowly, understanding the weight of the gesture. I see that. And I accept it. I felt a small thrill, not of dominance but of certainty. I was no longer subject to circumstance. I was no longer the frightened girl, the overlooked employee, the underestimated delivery girl who had stumbled into the wrong office. I was deliberate. I was measured. I was free. You've changed everything quietly, he said, voice low. And I am both terrified and fascinated. I expected nothing less, I said calmly. Terrified or fascinated, it doesn't matter. My choice remains. He hesitated, then spoke with raw honesty. I regret the pain I caused you. The betrayals. The dismissals. My fear of letting anyone in. But, seeing you now, seeing the woman you've become, it's awe-inspiring. I let the words settle. He had admitted everything, regret, fascination, fear, and admiration. And yet, the power remained with me. My silence, my deliberate gaze, my measured words, they carried more weight than his confession ever could. I forgive, I said finally, voice soft but deliberate. Not because you demanded it, not because I must, but because I choose to. I forgive, but I will not forget. And I will not compromise the strength I have earned. He exhaled, relief evident, yet tempered by the gravity of understanding. I don't take that lightly. And I will honor it. Every day. Every choice. Every moment. I studied him carefully. Then we begin, cautiously. Carefully. Measuredly. Not as a return to what was, but as a step into what can be. He nodded, eyes intense, admiration and a flicker of something more complex lingering there. And if I falter? He asked quietly. You'll answer for it, I said softly. But I will decide how and when. The power has shifted. And I intend to keep it. For the first time in months I felt a profound calm. The room, the office, the photographs, the notebooks, the contracts, all symbols of the journey I had taken, felt like markers of my authority, my transformation, my freedom. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs. I have made my choice, I said finally. It is not dictated by fear, nor by anger, nor by desire alone. It is dictated by awareness, by power, by freedom. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. And, does that choice include me? I let silence answer, letting him feel the weight of my decision. In that silence I held the power. My gaze, steady, deliberate, and unwavering, was a statement in itself. Finally I spoke, voice calm, measured. You may have a place, if you prove worthy, but it will be on my terms. Carefully. Deliberately. Always with awareness of the past and caution for the future. He nodded slowly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile appearing. I accept that. And I will earn it. I turned toward the window, looking out at the city lights below. They seemed distant yet familiar, a reminder that I had built this freedom quietly, deliberately, and with purpose. You understand, I said softly, that this is not just about us. It's about the power I hold, the strength I've earned, and the freedom I will not relinquish. Yes, he whispered. I understand. And I respect it. I let the silence settle between us one last time. No words were needed. No reassurances required. The balance had shifted, the lesson had been learned, and my choice was final. Freedom. Power. Awareness. Trust measured and earned. All held in my hands, deliberate, unyielding, and quietly absolute. He watched me, expression unreadable, yet I knew he understood. He would never underestimate me again. And I would never allow myself to be underestimated again. I turned back to him briefly, voice calm, steady, and deliberate. The past is yours to reckon with. The future is mine to shape. He nodded, accepting the statement fully. No words could undo the months of careful observation, silent endurance, and deliberate transformation. The power now rested with me, not as revenge nor as submission, but as freedom. And I felt it in my bones. I had chosen. I had acted. I had forged the outcome from the ashes of betrayal, heartbreak, and silent observation. The office lights dimmed around us. Outside, the city stretched endlessly, indifferent yet waiting. I had the power. I had the freedom. And for the first time I felt completely, unequivocally, myself. I stood in front of the mirror, tracing the outline of my own face. The reflection staring back wasn't the frightened delivery girl who had stumbled into the wrong office months ago. It wasn't the timid, overlooked cleaner who had been laughed at, whispered about, and undermined at every turn. This was someone new. Someone forged quietly in fire, molded by betrayal, heartbreak, and the slow, deliberate accumulation of patience and observation. You look different, he said softly from behind me. His voice was quiet, almost tentative, as if afraid that words could shatter the fragile calm I had built. I didn't turn immediately. I just studied my reflection, letting the truth sink in. I feel different, I admitted, my voice calm but firm. I've endured, observed, and changed. Not because anyone demanded it. Not because I sought revenge. But because I chose it. He stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne familiar yet no longer intimidating. I see that now, he said quietly. And I understand why you're the way you are. Why you've kept your walls intact, your control deliberate. I regret everything that made you doubt yourself, made you fear me or anyone else. I turned to face him fully, studying the flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. Regret alone isn't enough, I said softly, reaching for the child photograph that had been on his desk for months, the symbol of responsibility, awareness, and silent transformation. What matters is action, change, and respect for boundaries. I've learned that the hard way. He nodded, taking a careful step closer, mindful of the invisible lines I had drawn. And I intend to honor them. Every day. Every moment. I know it will take time. But I'm willing. I let the silence linger, letting the weight of months of struggle, observation, and quiet endurance settle between us. Time, I said finally, is exactly what I need. Not because I doubt you entirely, but because I've learned to measure trust carefully. To observe, to wait, to decide, deliberately. He smiled faintly, a flicker of something vulnerable peeking through the layers of his usual composed exterior. And I will wait. Not push. Not demand. Only show that I can be trusted. I studied him carefully, noting every gesture, every hesitation. He had changed, subtly, quietly, in ways that mirrored my own transformation. Yet, I knew perfection was impossible, and unnecessary. What mattered was honesty, self-awareness, and willingness to grow. You've learned something important, I said, voice soft but deliberate. Transformation isn't about changing others. It's about changing yourself. Quietly. Deliberately. Until your world shifts entirely. He nodded, looking down at the photograph I still held in my hands. And you have done exactly that. For yourself. I've witnessed it and I respect it more than words can say. I placed the photograph gently back on the shelf, letting it rest as a silent witness to the months of growth, pain, and resilience. I don't need perfection, I said softly. I don't need control over anyone else. I need honesty and awareness. That is enough. That is what allows me to move forward without fear. He stepped closer, voice low. And if I falter? You'll answer for it, I said calmly, meeting his gaze fully. But it will not undo what I have learned, what I have become. My freedom, my strength, my awareness, those are mine. No one can take them from me. He exhaled slowly, absorbing the weight of my words. I understand. And I will honor it. Always. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction settle over me, the kind that doesn't demand recognition, applause, or validation. It wasn't triumph in the way others might expect. It was something deeper. Something that came from surviving, observing, and deliberately shaping my own journey. I want you to see something, I said finally, holding up the contract folder I had kept on my desk. The symbol of responsibility, diligence, and careful strategy. These aren't just obligations. They're markers of what I've learned, of the power I've cultivated quietly, without spectacle, without needing anyone's approval. He took it carefully, his eyes reflecting respect and something more, an understanding of the effort, patience, and deliberate thought that had gone into every decision I had made. I see it, he said softly. And I respect you for it. Truly. I let a faint smile touch my lips. Respect must be earned. Trust must be measured. And freedom must always remain in your own hands. He nodded slowly, the sincerity in his gaze unshakable. And I will honor that. Every day. Every step of the way. I turned back to the mirror, looking at the woman I had become. The reflection no longer held fear, hesitation, or doubt. Only quiet strength, awareness, and deliberate choice. You've changed too, I said softly, almost to myself. But in a way that complements rather than controls. That's the only way this works. Honesty, not perfection. Awareness, not dominance. He stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. Not possessively, not demanding, but in solidarity, as someone who recognized the path we had both traveled. I will follow your lead, he said quietly. Not to control, not to manipulate. Only to support as you allow. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of months of struggle finally settle into quiet peace. Then we proceed carefully, I said softly. Deliberately. Observing, learning, and growing. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that acknowledges human flaws, vulnerability, and the delicate balance of trust. And if I stumble? You'll answer for it, I said calmly. But I will also guide the path. That is my choice. That is my power. And I will not relinquish it. The office lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, the city pulsed quietly, unaware of the transformations within these walls. I turned back to the window, taking a deep breath, letting the quiet satisfaction settle fully within me. You've grown, he said softly, almost in awe. I didn't know someone could endure so much and still retain their essence. Still retain control. I let the words hang, letting him see the full measure of my transformation. Endurance, I said finally. Observation. Patience. Deliberate choice. That is how strength is built quietly. And that is how freedom is earned. He nodded slowly as if tasting each word, understanding their depth, their weight, their truth. And I will respect that. Always. Because I finally understand the path you've walked. I placed a hand lightly on the child photograph once more, the symbol of responsibility, awareness, and silent transformation. This journey isn't about changing anyone else, I said softly. It's about shaping myself. Quietly, deliberately, until my world shifts entirely. And that I have done. He stepped closer, voice low, almost reverent. And I will honor that. I will not try to undo it. I will not try to control it. I will only support it as you allow. I smiled faintly, feeling a wave of calm sweep over me. Then we have reached closure, I said softly. Not the explosive kind that demands attention. Not the dramatic kind that needs validation. But quiet. Satisfying. The kind that comes when you finally understand your own strength, your own freedom, your own choice. He nodded, the faintest flicker of emotion crossing his features. I see it. And I honor it. I turned back to the mirror, taking one last look at the woman I had become. Resilient. Observant. Powerful in ways no one could measure. I had endured, I had transformed, and I had emerged, fully aware of my own agency. We don't need perfection, I said softly, more to myself than to him. We only need honesty, awareness, and the willingness to move forward. That is enough. He stepped beside me, quiet, attentive, and aware of his place beside the woman I had become. No walls. No false pretenses. Only honesty. Only measured respect. And in that, I whispered, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, I find peace. The city lights flickered in the distance, distant but constant. My world had shifted entirely, not because anyone else changed but because I had. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt complete. Not triumphant. Not vindicated. Not even happy in the conventional sense. Just satisfied. Quietly. Deliberately. Fully. I turned to him one last time, voice calm, steady, and deliberate. This is emotional closure. Not for him, not for anyone else. For me. And in that, I am free. He nodded slowly, understanding fully. And I will honor that. Always. I let the silence settle between us, a soft, unbroken peace. The child photograph, the notebook, the contract folder, all symbols of the journey, lay quietly around us, bearing witness to transformation earned quietly, deliberately, and irrevocably. I stepped back, feeling the weight of months of struggle lift fully. Freedom, strength, awareness, choice, all mine. And in that, I finally understood the meaning of transformation. Not changing him. Not changing them. Not changing anyone else. Changing myself. Silently. Deliberately. Until my world shifted entirely. And now, it had.